Welcome to Viewpoint on Ukraine today, where we are joined by Bohdan Zhuk, a coordinator for the Kyiv International Film Festival, Molodist. Bohdan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So very recently you have just come back to Kyiv from London, where you were there presenting the Days of Ukrainian Cinema. So can you tell us what happened in London? What were the audience like? What films did you present?
It was a 4-day event that opened last Thursday on December 10th. Ukrainian Cinema Days in London. 6 films, well, 5 films and a collection of shorts. Over 4 days in Shoreditch district of London, not far from from city. It was quite an interesting event, I would say, because our goal is to promote the Ukrainian cinema and to spread, well, cultural diplomacy is very effective in our view, so bringing Ukrainian films, for instance, is abroad, I mean, is very important. And so 4 days, 6 screenings. We showed both classic and contemporary films, documentaries and fiction, very diverse. So we had one family film, which is called The Trumpeter, one classic film, White Bird with a Black Mark, which is a masterpiece of Ukrainian poetic cinema of the 1970s. Documentary The Living Fire, which was quite a hit last year, 2014. It won a special jury prize at the Toronto Hot Docs Film Festival.
So some of these films have already proved to be very successful outside of Ukraine?
Yes, very much.
How were they received in London?
Very well received, I would say. Of course, the audience was both Ukrainians and the British people, or just the international audience, and a lot of them were very interested. It was, I would say, it was a success overall, because most of the screenings were full. The cinema was packed, and a lot of people stayed for the Q&As because we brought the filmmakers, either director or producer or an actor for the film, for each film, and there was a chance to talk to each one of them. So Q&As were very interesting. There were lots of questions, and I would say it was a success.
So the audience had an opportunity to speak with the directors of the films. Did you find that the British audience had an understanding of what was going on in Ukraine? You said some of these films were factual, so was this news to them, some of the things they were seeing?
I would say so, because from what I saw, from what I learned talking to Londoners, they don't know that much about Ukraine, either present or past. And so there were a few films showing the history of Ukraine, some of the parts of the history of Ukraine, for instance, The Guide, well, which was the highest-grossing Ukrainian film last year and ever. In Ukraine, it tells the story of the blind Kobzars, musicians who were killed in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. And it's related to Holodomor, the genocide of Ukrainians, and so such aspects, well, such stories from the past of Ukraine were largely news to...
Unfamiliar topics to the British audience.
Either unfamiliar or not very familiar, because, well, many of them, I would say, have heard of Holodomor, for instance, but they didn't know much, so this was a very good opportunity to get an insight, to see the Ukrainian view on that.
So you talk about cultural diplomacy, and this is not the first time you've presented Ukrainian cinema overseas. Before we were speaking off camera, you said you've been to Berlin and to Paris and a few other places. Yes. Did you find a similar situation there with the understanding of Ukraine as you found in London?
I would say so, yes. We went to Paris this last April, and before that Munich in December, and we keep presenting for many years the Ukrainian cinema in general at the Berlinale, the film festival, and Cannes. And yeah, not so many people know of Ukrainian culture that much, so this, even smaller events like this are of a great interest to them.
So you were presenting films which covered Ukrainian history and culture, both past and present. We've recently seen a number of films released. One of the most well-known, I think, will be Winter on Fire, which documents the 93 days of Ukraine's revolution of dignity. Now, in your opinion, how important is it that the film industry is the one promoting or explaining to audiences overseas what is happening in a country, when you, of course, have journalists and news agencies? I mean, where does the responsibility fall in your mind?
Well, the documentaries are a very good way of bringing stories outside, showing what's actually happened, because, well, quite often the news broadcasts, the reports are of smaller scale, not very insightful sometimes, and so
not particularly in depth, you would say.
Yes, yes. Films like Maidan, for instance, that was released last year, or Winter on Fire, are a very good way of telling what's happening. Of course, they can be biased. Maybe you could see that in some way, but it's unavoidable, I would say, because
arguably news also can be biased. So.
Yes, of course. So it's.
Okay, well, one thing I would like to touch on is the Molodist Film Festival, for which you are a coordinator. I know over the last 2 years there has been some issues with funding. Ukraine's Minister of Culture, Mr. Vyacheslav Krylenko, recently promised to invest more money into the film festival in coming years. So can you tell us, what do you see from the parliament in Kyiv? How are they helping you? What do you expect from these guys?
Honestly, there's not so much help, but very hopefully this promise by Vyacheslav Krylenko will be honest and will turn out to be a real help for the festival. It was, well, culture is not doesn't get much attention from the government, unfortunately, in Ukraine. Of course, we have the support of the State Film Agency and the Ministry of Culture, and it is really helpful, some of that funding and support in other ways. But for the most influential film festival in Ukraine, for a major film event in Eastern Europe, which the Molodist Film Festival is.
Some 45 years old, I believe, yes?
Exactly, yes, 45 years. It deserves more support, because now in the troubled times we've had some trouble with the funding. It's not so easy to arrange an event like that with showing at least 200 films in over 9 days. It's a very important cultural event in terms of bringing the international cinema, the best of international cinema, to Ukraine, as well as showing Ukrainian cinema to the foreign audiences, because we have Ukrainian national competition as well as other events dedicated to Ukrainian filmmakers. So it works both ways, and it's very meaningful, I would say.
Because I know in 2014 the funding for the Ukraine's film industry was cut quite drastically. However, a few months ago, then the funding was increased quite significantly. Now, this money has been allocated to be spent on some 40 films. So has any of this money been allocated to the Molodist Film Festival, or is this being purely spent on the development of new movies?
Well, it's different expenses, I would say, but yes, we've got some support from the State Film Agency. After I understand, they got more funding from the government. But of course, making films is the most important, because we have to, well...
You have to show something, yes.
Yes, we have to, as Molodist, we have to show something, and of course something has to be made continuously. There shouldn't be no breaks, because this will be harmful to the industry.
Okay. And just one final question then. So what are you planning for Molodist next year? What's in the future?
Well, first of all, we are planning a representation of Ukrainian cinema at the Berlin Film Festival, which is taking place in February. Okay. And further, we hope to work in Cannes, and of course, for the film festival for our film festival Molodist that is taking place in October, we of course plan a lot. Usually, we bring a few hundred films. So, well, these are two of our goals. One is bringing foreign cinema, the best here, for the audiences to see it, and
the
for
local audience, yes.
Yes, and for the filmmakers to also learn something. And bringing Ukrainian cinema outside. We hope to continue these events like the Ukrainian Cinema Days in London. And
so to promote Ukraine's cultural footprint around the world.
Yes.
Fantastic. Bogdan, that is all we have time for. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
You have been watching Viewpoint on Ukraine Today, where we have been joined by Bohdan Zhuk from the Kyiv International Film Festival, Molodist. Thank you for watching.